Good afternoon. I'm Andy Ahpo, originally from Hawaii, where I initially got exposure to the martial arts at around the age 6. One of my grandfathers, who had migrated originally from China, was insistent in my father ensuring that I be exposed to martial arts. So initially at 6, I was introduced to a Sifu who was teaching Silam Kung Fu on the island of Hilo, Hawaii. And again, throughout my teenage years, was involved in a variety of martial arts in Hawaii, including Shotokan, Aikido, and Kodokan Jiu-Jitsu. Later joined the U.S. Air Force after graduating from high school in 1959. Eventually was sent to Sacramento, California, stationed at McClellan Air Force Base, where in 1966 I met my first Tangsudo instructor, who's Grandmaster Mariano S. Ahpo. And that was in November of 1959. So I've been in Tangsudo since 1959. Did not initially get my first down until 1966, however, since Grandmaster S. Ahpo at the time had lost his ability to communicate with his instructor in Korea, Grandmaster Kim So-gi, or with Grandmaster Hong-gi.
Good, sir. And so, what was your early training like at Grandmaster S. Ahpo?
Well, by today's standards, I guess you would say that it was the hardcore training. For instance, we all knew that class would start at 6:30, but we never really knew what time it would end.
Right.
It would end when it ended. It could end at 8:30, it could end at 10:30. So the classes were, I think I would say, most often than not, 3 to 4 hours.
Wow.
A couple days a week initially, and then later to 3 or 4 days a week. Very hardcore training. Warm-ups could involve a 1-mile run before even starting the class, followed by a variety of martial arts calisthenics, including push-ups with our fingertips, knuckles, sit-ups, stretching exercises, etc. And of course, every time we practiced blocking and striking, we would use a bamboo shinai or a solid bamboo pole about 2 inches diameter to test the strength of our arms and legs, sometimes back and abdomen as well. So it was good, strong training. We never expected anything less. And when I say we, his initial students, there were about 6 of us. We were all from McClellan and Mather Air Force bases, which were 2 air bases that were active at the time in Sacramento. And we all had one thing in common, or 2 things in common. All of us had come from Hawaii, or not necessarily Hawaiian ethnically rather, but from Hawaii, and we all had some exposure to martial arts prior to that time.
So, in your journey, could you talk on a couple of key points that really influenced your personal development in martial arts?
Can you be a little more specific?
Sure. Let me ask. You attended the Long Beach Internationals, so you met Bruce Lee, you met Grandmaster Wong Ki, the founder of Tangsudo, and trained with him personally. You had some really great individual experiences that not many people have had. If you could talk about those, would be interesting to people.
Yeah, well, throughout my whole life, I had been fortunate enough to, mostly by accident as a kid, be exposed to some well-known martial arts icons. In Hawaii, for instance, there for a while in high school, I worked at a gas station, and a regular customer was Professor Chow, who was, of course, who was an icon, and who was
in third place, Master Haynes.
Marquis instructor. I went to a community center where I did my swimming and played sports called Palama Settlement in the rough neighborhood of Kalihi. And the class there was taught by Adriano Emperado, who was teaching Kaju Kempo. I never studied Kaju Kempo, but I would watch his classes, and many of his students and I went to high school with each other. I also went to school with a gentleman by the name of Kenneth Funakoshi, who is in Shotokan, who has direct ties to the founder teacher. So I was lucky enough to be exposed to that, and so I think I was rooted in understanding initially that martial arts was something that was not going to be a quick study. You either decided when you initially joined that you were going to do it for a lifetime.
Okay.
We don't know exactly what a lifetime meant per se, but there was no expectation to get rank. Rank was the furthest thing from our mind. All we ever wanted to do was train. And we figured that if and when the instructor felt that we were worthy of being given rank or promoted, that's when we would get it. The rank testings at that time was pretty brutal by today's standards. For me in my day and age, it was just what was the norm. When I say brutal by today's standards, my first class in karate, for instance, I didn't have any experience. I had to spar everybody in the dojo that night. So the concept was, if you came back the next day, then you were worthy, maybe, of being accepted as a student. And so, I think basically my initial exposure to these icons, and then eventually to Grandmaster Grandmaster Wonky, was how important it was, and from my perspective, still is, to maintain the tradition of the martial arts. And that we shouldn't be putting fighting, for instance, which obviously is the thing that most people get drawn to who are not aware of martial arts, but to the entire concept, the entire philosophy, the entire methodology, the philosophy of Tang Soo Do, which includes development of character, being a better human being, and fighting is something that we learn to do and get quite adept at, but it should be the furthest thing from our mind in dealing with and interacting with other human beings. So I was able in I would probably call it the heyday of American tournaments back in the 60s, when I started competing in Long Beach Internationals, which was hosted by Parker, and then the California State Championships hosted by Ralph Castro, and Steve Armstrong, who was an Okinawa practitioner in Seattle, Washington initially. One of the things that I found all of the practitioners to have in common was, at that time, I think people were more rooted to tradition, to maintaining strong principles, making sure that instruction included philosophy, meditation, not just physical training, and that our purpose in martial arts is not only to develop our character, but in doing so, as we move on as an instructor, to expand our own horizons, not to limit it just to what we were taught from our instructors, but we were given the freedom at the time by those instructors to move on and explore further, to be able to take the martial art to another level. For instance, when I finally got my Chodan in 1966, Grandmaster Estioko says, "Andy, I'm kicking you out. You have to leave now." And I said, "Why, sir? I mean, I'm your first student to be promoted to Chodan. I want to continue to train with you." He said, "Well," he says, "there's nothing more I can teach you." When he left Korea, he was a Chodan. I was certain there was many things that he could teach me, because he continued to explore without any direction and without any exposure to senior training when he first came back to the States from Korea. But basically what he wanted me to do is he encouraged me to open a dojan. His dojan was a closed dojan. He wasn't open at the time to teaching anybody outside of Hawaiian or Filipino community. It was a time when, and I don't want to cast him as but this is a racial thing. We were part of an era where we were still kind of taught, you got to be really careful about who you allow to teach this precious martial art to. So we were very protective of the martial art. However, having seen the success that Chuck Norris was doing in Redondo Beach and Torrance, he felt that I was suited to opening a dojo in a business environment. So I opened my first dojo in 1966, soon after making my children.
Kwanjanim, what do you say is one of the most important things you ever personally learned in martial arts?
You know, there are probably too many to count. But so I have to think a little bit. I think the most important thing is interesting because for me, and I've been quoted, and those that have been around me for many years have often heard me make give this spiel. But particularly from Grandmaster Hongi and my Tang Soo Do training, that the greatest thing we can do as human beings is to help our fellow man. And not only was that easy for me to adapt, it was also part of my Hawaiian culture. So it was a perfect marriage between my Hawaiian culture and upbringing to my martial arts training. So that for me is something that I continue to stress with all the people that I've been able to be exposed to in Tang Soo Do and in my teachings. The other thing is that, as I mentioned to you earlier today, I said, people might be wondering, why are there so many factions of Tang Soo Do now? Why at one time we seemed like we were all together and we broke
Okay, that's not competitive.
we fractured and well, I don't think we're fractured. I don't think it's unhealthy to have a variety of martial arts organizations under the Tang Soo Do banner. Remember what I said to you was, this is the reason for this is basically twofold. Number one, Tang Soo Do is a perfect martial arts. But the human beings that are studying are not perfect. That's number one. Okay? And number two has to do with one of the basic principles of Tang Soo Do philosophy that we teach, and that's called Rupon. The ability to not only continue to reinforce and to perpetuate what you learn from the source, but to also evolve and to contribute back to the art things that you may have been able to learn by expanding your horizons and tapping into other martial arts or other types of philosophies, including a variety of religious practices. Not in the spiritual sense, but in terms of how we should be treating our fellow mankind or human beings.
On that note, my last question would be to pass on to future generations a philosophy or personal words of wisdom that you'd like to see, because the generations obviously changed. We're seeing that now in our world. What would you like to pass on to people that are going to train, say, 100 years from now, 50 years from now? We won't be around anymore, but the art will still be proliferating and growing.
Green belt, boys and girls, 7 and 8-year-old, round 3.
As the art continues to evolve and move on, as in harmony with, or disharmony, whatever the case may be, with human beings, it's important for us to always remember the source. Remember that we got to our point on the backs of others, and to maintain the tradition of the art, so that, you know, it's like any. It's like a cultural thing. Like for Hawaiians today are continuing to struggle to ensure that they preserve their culture. Because it's hard for us to have the newer or younger generation of Hawaiians living in this technological world, this new Western world, understand why it's important to maintain tradition with all the technology and all the advances that we see that are afforded us in basically what is a much easier lifestyle than we had when we were kids. So I see those two things parallel between my culture and the martial arts. It's important to understand whether we are still directly affiliated with a particular group of Tang Soo Do practitioners or not, that we're still really one family. We may not be living in the same state. We may not be going to the same church, but we all are basically attempting to do the same thing. And that's to spread through our teaching, Tang Soo Do, and all of the beautiful things, not just the physical practice, but the spiritual, philosophical things that are so important to helping mankind to move hopefully in harmony into a more peaceful existence. So for me, I don't know that we would ever be able to reunify. And I'm not so sure reunifying is a necessary thing as long as we continue to respect each other, respect what we do, but also respect how important difference is, how important it is to have some differences, and to respect the fact that today, in particular, since we have so many well-equipped and expert Grandmasters in Tang Soo, that contributing to the growth of this art is not in the hands of just one individual or one organization. In a way, I think the fact that we have a variety of organizations and Grandmasters these days, all teaching under the Tang Soo banner, is testimony to what the original philosophy of Grandmaster Wanghi was. And his philosophy was simply to not only revive Tang Soo under the new banner Subato, but to be able to take it to all parts of the world to benefit humankind.
Fantastic.